Indigenous accounting academic with a PhD and CPA qualification. She is the 2023 Neville Bonner Award winner for Indigenous Education and the 2024 Australia Account Academic of the Year for her role in implementing foundational courses that recognise First People knowledges in business. Kerry herself has said that she witnessed the lack of Indigenous content in any business courses. So after completing her PhD, she led and transformed Griffith University business curriculum using storytelling and co-design approaches. As a result, she created a pioneering standalone course, bringing the greater understanding of Indigenous history, knowledge, and culture across all aspects of Australian business and society. Kerry is a fellow of the CPA and has featured in an article for the July 2021 issue of In the Black magazine, as well. And she also has 2 CPA rooms named after her, which is the goal for everyone, I'm sure. And they are in the Melbourne and Brisbane offices. She's also a member of the Indigenous Accounts Australia and the Indigenous Advisory Group. So please join me in welcoming Associate Professor Kerry Boyle.
Wow, thank you. That was amazing to hear yourself all wrapped up in all the achievements, especially when being a person that suffers imposter syndrome. So God help us if you didn't have that that sort of in drive. But yeah, thank you all for coming. As early as it is in Adelaide, temperature's lovely and cool, which you know, where I come from, it's you know, on the Gold Coast. We're having to bear through 30-degree days of late. But today, what I'd like to do is present, you know, a bit of a wrap up of why I ended up with the Neville Bonner Award, you know, sort of winning education, you know, sort of award for the 2023. And more importantly, you know, how my storytelling of my own, you know, my own life journey has been the, I suppose, the driver of why I've ended up where I am. So I think starting off and looking at, you know, why our First Nations culture is important in business really is about that, you know, there was no reason or nothing existing when I started my degree. Just getting this to start. Okay, so again, acknowledging country is really, I suppose, a lot of people always say, why do we have to acknowledge country, even if we're non-Indigenous? The thing is that it's really imperative that we understand why our connection to country as being First Nations people, Aboriginal people, Torres Strait Islander, is that that's where our story time and our dream time and our origins have all connected. And we always pay homage to, you know, where we come from. The history of that, excuse me, is that because of government policies, we've ended up being very fragmented in contemporary today's society. And as we go through life, we try to, you know, find our way back to where our families originated from many thousands of years ago. So by paying acknowledgement to country is about, you know, acknowledging the journeys that all our past Indigenous people have experienced, and also those that are still being able to, you know, be traditional custodians of the land of today. So it's just respecting that we're coming full circle. We need to make sure that when we're on a particular, you know, country, that we acknowledge that those are the experiences and obviously the journeys that most of us have been on. So I do pay, you know, respects to the Gunner people here of Adelaide. I have spent most of my life, more than half of my life, with the Kumbermeri people on the Gold Coast. But when I've done a lot of my history tracing, you know, I do find that my mum was born in Cherbourg, so my mob is the Waka Waka Nations people. So here's just a little snapshot of my journey. So that's my mum up on the right at the age of 14. And at that stage, she was working and had been in the Salvation Army home from when she was taken from Cherbourg. So at this stage, she had no idea who she was. She was just told forget where you came from, you're better off not knowing. And this was what the story she told me. She's no longer alive, and to see all this, and I'm just hoping that she's looking down on me. I know she would be, because this is her story. When she was taken, her mother, my grandmother, had already experienced the Aboriginal Protection Act. She had been sent out at the age of 2 in the 1900s to work on an Aboriginal that was an actual farm in Gladstone. So at the age of 2, she was sent out on a work permit. So when she was 29, she fell pregnant to a white man, and that's where my mum came from that. As a part of not acknowledging that he was the paternal, parent, the biological father, my grandmother was sent to Cherbourg. So here she was in Cherbourg, gave birth to my mum, and then at the age of 3, my mum was taken. So you can see that, like that journey of disconnection, removal, all the policies that were in place at that time has been also present in my life. So when you see the next photo, which is me when I was put into a Salvation Army home myself. So at the age of, I think I was about 4 or 5, I was also removed from my family. So, and that was right out in New South Wales in a place called Canoundra. It was a Salvation Army run home. So my experiences of, removal, stolen generations, stolen wages was another part of the policy that, my mum worked until she was 15, never received any of her money, that sort of part of the impact of the policy. So we fast forward a few years. I mean, when I was 15, I did leave the home. I did go and live with my father and my stepmother, but I was pregnant by the time I was 16. So having been 16, left home, and I think it was through the Gough Whitlam government that I ended up on an unmarried mother's pension. So struggling along at the age of 16, what am I going to do? Where I'm going to end up? You just don't know. So again, I always found education seemed to be a guiding light in my life. I was pretty good at it, but all my reports used to say I talk too much. I was always distracted, and it sort of, didn't hinder my journey, but it made me a little bit more aware that I was bright, but my own self-beliefs of where I came from always shadowed where I would end up and what I would achieve. So when I, did I used to call myself, jack of all trades, but Jill of none, because I hadn't really achieved anything that was of any value that I could see, and education hadn't been part of it. So fast forward along, 2 marriages later.
These I've just chucked out some
4 children.
So they need to be eaten today.
So yeah, I ended up, when my children were, I ended up having twin boys at the age of 36. And I decided that I didn't want to be just a, PNC mum or whatever. I thought it was a time that I could actually pick up and do some, some education. At that stage, my daughter was 20. She'd already been studying at Griffith for a year. And I just used to whinge at her. I've always wanted to, to go to uni, and I always wanted to be a maths teacher. Go figure. Who wants that? But it was me. It was something that I was really good at with the numbers. So anyway, my daughter said, "Look, Mum, here's an alternate entry," which for Griffith, that was our alternative pathway for people who identified as Aboriginal or Torres Strait. So I filled it in. I had to give her $60 to, register, because it was a late registration. And that was, where I embarked on doing my career. But the funny thing was, is that when I said to my daughter, she said, "You've got to put in, what do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I want to be a teacher, like a maths teacher." She said, "Oh, Mum, there's not much of a career and money in that." She said, "So why don't you think about something else?" And I said, "Well, what else has got numbers in it?" And so she said, "Accounting." And I thought, well, okay, there you go. Put that down, not believing that I would get accepted for one thing, but also, thinking oh, well, you know, if I get in, I could probably, you know, sort of, you know, wing it, you know, which has probably been a bit of a trait that I've followed through in my life. So I ended up getting in, I, you know, embarked on the career, but I found my home being in our Murray Centre, which is our Griffith University Murrays. And that's what we had titled our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander units. And it was the place where I started thinking, this is my journey for where I need to be. Didn't know where it was going to end up. But I started in 1997, I think it was, tutoring some of our own Indigenous students in some of our accounting courses. And so before I actually graduated, which you can see in 1999, I'd already started getting the taste and feeling the blood that I needed to get into, which was the actual education part of it. So then I decided, after I went in, I was invited to go and do some mainstream tutoring. And the tutoring, you wouldn't believe it, was economics. So here I'd been through, back then we used to have an economics micro and an economics macro. And who can make sense of either or? But it got to my last year in 1998 when I put it all together, and I absolutely loved it because I quite could see how the accounting, economics and everything, but it's also about people, you know, people being included in how we look at policy for change and, you know, looking after, you know, Indigenous people. So then they said to me back in 2000, and I think it was 2 or 3, after I'd been tutoring in this area, you need to get serious, Kerry. If you want to have a career and be, you know, have a job and keep this education going, you need to do your honours. So I did did my honours, but I wasn't real comfortable with the topic. But I thought, look, I've got to do what you know, I need to do. And it's funny, I'm not sure whether it was the University of South Australia or or Adelaide Uni, but Ratnam Alagaya was my supervisor. I'd been working with him teaching at that stage company accounting because I'd progressed up, you know, accounting principles 101, financial accounting, gone through, and I absolutely loved company accounting. And that was really good because nobody else wanted the course to teach. So that's where Ratnam and I started talking about, I'll be your supervisor. Let's get in there and start looking at bankruptcy. And I thought, oh, I like that because the stories of all the, you know, what the managers and CEOs used to get up to cook the books. So I did that. And then I progressed and I was offered a job with the Murray Centre for a year when I actually got my honours. But I didn't feel that that was where I had to be. And just luckily enough, I was offered, I applied and got a position with the accounting department. But I had to commit to doing a PhD. I'm sort of saying all the right things, you know, ticking all the boxes. This is what I want to do. But thinking to myself, I'll never get this finished, you know, because I don't see myself as being somebody who can commit and actually write, who can actually, you know, do all this. Because inside my head, I was always told as a child, you're never going to amount to anything, you know, you're not good enough. I think I was even voted at my high school graduation that I didn't go to because I was pregnant, that I was going to be the most unlikely to achieve to anything. So this is all factored into my head. And I think, oh, I've got 6 years to do it. Probably after that, you know, I can just sail off to wherever. Anyway, cut a long story short, it took me 8 years to do. I did dig down. I completed my PhD in bankruptcy prediction modelling. It had all the numbers. It had all the stories. I only did it on Australian companies, but it was just that, you know, it was the journey of really thinking, you know, I have to finish something because in my mind, I had sacrificed and compromised my time with my kids that I didn't realise at the time to do this. And then when I got to the crunch, I thought, I cannot just drop it. I cannot just leave and not have something to show and give to my kids as a legacy of what I did. So I buckled down. I graduated, as you can see. Patty Savinsky was there from the onset. She has written a book about bankruptcy prediction modelling, and she was my champion back then. So once I graduated, I thought, well, what next? So because I did the prediction modelling on the introduction of accounting standards, international accounting standards for intangible assets, I started delving into some of the companies that were Indigenous led. because I'm still on my journey of trying to trace and connect all the dots. And in that journey, I found that the way that we calculate royalties that go back to Indigenous communities on using their land, their resources, was unfair and inaccurate because it was based on Western derived formulas. So that being, I decided that I needed to move on. And so, you know, my journey of looking at, you know, the next story being, you know, the story in the black came about when I graduated. I moved into thinking, what do I do next? My next champion was the Dean Learning and Teaching. She said to me, Kerry, she says, even though I don't identify, she said, you know, you've known me, we've talked over the years. I'd love you to develop a standalone course. Well, send me away. 18 months later, I've come back. I've presented her with the portfolio of my designed course. And she takes one look at it and she says, Kerry, you can do better than that. And I'm thinking, well, but I looked at it. It was a redesign of trying to do an Indigenous way of learning, doing, being into a Western framework. And I had quizzes, I had written assignments, I had a final exam, I had all those things that, you know, is in the assessment that were all Western driven. So I went back and I thought, well, who do I go to? So I actually went on to reconciliation.org to have a look at what their governance framework and their teaching tools were doing. And out of that, I started seeing all the assessment type ideas. So I'm going to go through those a little bit later, but just to take on notes so we can get through, you know, my journey, and then we'll go into the tin tacks of, you know, how did this all happen? So at the next step, this Dean Learning and Teaching said to me, Kerry, why don't we at the same time apply for an ARC Indigenous Discovery Grant? Why not? Here I am, a level B, you know, nobody, I was told on the side, talking in the kitchen, had anyone done or won an ARC Indigenous Discovery as a level B. But because I'd done a few sort of, you know, things with the Indigenous business course, I was on it'd taken a couple of years for us to actually win it. But this was in the process, and I ended up at the end of that process to be, you know, promoted to a level C. So I went out on this ARC grant. I went out all through all the, you know, WA, right through Northern Territory. We did a huge amount of data collection, and it was all about financial literacy for our Indigenous business owners and what they were experiencing in terms of all the government initiatives that they were, you know, putting out through the Closing the Gap policies, you know, trying to work out how they were utilising these resources and whether or not they were working. So that was another part of the journey. And I got into the In the Black magazine about some of the results that came out of that. And I got to meet Ken Wyatt, went down and we had a chat about, you know, what the overall message was. And I said to him, you need to listen to the people on the ground. I said, they know exactly what they need in their communities, what they need to learn and all the courses and all the support they need, because otherwise you're wasting money. It's just by the time it gets to them, it's almost, you know, nothing. So anyway, after talking to Ken Wyatt and going back, that's when I got the achievement for our First Peoples alumni winner. I got our business school award, and then I got the overall university. Now, this wasn't easy for me because I hated actually putting my hand up and saying, you know, here I am, I'm the, you know, this tall poppy, because I think with Aboriginal people, we tend to not do that because a lot of our mob will soon bring us back down to earth. You know, don't get a big head. So, you know, still struggling. You know, I actually got an award with the CPA. Again, I had developed a course in integrating the CPA modules into a Masters of Accounting. So another accolade, I ended up with a room named after me. So then, and this is all my champions that came from the CPA. So, you know, I'd love to name them. So I'm just not whether or not they would like to have their name promoted online. But, you know, I think that they know who they are. You know, my champions that have been with me that have helped me, you know, bring forward the, you know, the Western ways of doing things, but allowing me to indigenise them. So, you know, thank you to them. So the 2003, 2004 winning of the education things is where I'm going to go through next. So when I developed the initial course, it wasn't like something that I knew how to do. I wasn't a learning and teaching designer. I wasn't a course developer. You know, I had no idea. But what I did, and after, you know, you go through a couple of years of learning, I found that, you know, how do I create this course? And I ran it for a couple of years. How am I actually engaging the students? And I found that it brought back my own learning journey, because when I actually had the big textbooks, you know, for accounting theory, you know, all those sort of things, it was like I'd read it and I kept on reading these paragraphs that I'd have to read 2 or 3 times. So I started, and because long time ago, I used to love doing crosswords. I had this thesaurus that I had kept all these years, that I used to write certain words that resonated with me that I could interpret and translate so that I understood them. I did that to my textbooks. So I started highlighting things. So I started thinking, what was I doing that I could implement as a way of teaching? And it was every time I read for example, in a textbook, that's what I put in red, because that was how they applied what they're trying to get you to understand and put it into practice. So I looked at that in terms of being able to look at developing a course and engaging with students. So when I relate to that is that when students are in the classroom, you have to be prepared that they're going to be so diverse, not only in culture, but in the way they learn. So I used to just try and look at, if I wasn't getting that light on, you know, when the students go, I get that. You weren't getting that response back that your students actually were engaging in and understanding what you were saying. So I started doing a little bit more of the stories. And with that, the stories were coming from where it was in my life that any of the things that I was trying to teach them in the content of this standalone course, they were actually being able to understand, because I was giving them that space. But also too, it had to be on a reflective thing. So it can't be just all me speaking at them. So what I decided, and I didn't understand how it came about, but it worked out, is that the course became about getting students to understand their own culture and position first. Who are you? Where do you come from? Who drives your values and your belief systems? And how do you relate that you're similar to what my stories are? Or how are they different? And I think that's what was really, really powerful. So in the, you know, using the 8 ways of learning, which is obviously historical and it's just so empowering, is the story sharing, it's the mapping, it's, you know, being verbal, non-verbal, it's being, you know, telling the, you know, how to construct and deconstruct, you know, things that we want students to learn. And in part, when I developed the first Indigenous business course, which is now called Indigenous Australians, It's Everybody's Business, because it went through a couple of morphs of getting it right. That map was commissioned that I had some money in my research account to help get a learning and teaching designer to actually help me build the course content. At the same time, we wrote a handbook, and that map she developed. So, you know, it's got all the Aboriginal clan names embedded in it, and it was just something that I found that the students really loved, because it had the art, it had the history, but it also wasn't just like the AATSIS map that we've seen, you know, and I don't think that, well, it's not going to change much over thousands and thousands of years, because it is what it is. But it was a nice way of creating something new that the students could see, you know, trying to work out where they were. And we had exercises on who are you, where do you come from, can you find yourself on the map, what's your local traditional owner clan group. So that was the course, Indigenous Australians, It's Everybody's Business. And in the design of it, and as I put into the promo and everything, is that it was co-designed. It was, you know, driven from trying to get the course topics to be about business. The one thing we need to make sure in that, because there wasn't really any Indigenous content in any business course except for law, because we had the Mabo, decision making and things in law, which was, slow but small, but we were, there. Nothing in business was there. But when we think about it, and this is my thinking as well, everybody's going to work for somebody. You're going to work for some organisation, some firm. You're going to go out and do placements. You're going to go out and meet people. You're going to go out into different countries. You're either going to own a business or be in a business. So it's everybody's business that we've got to make sure that not only are we saying that this is about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, this is about the non-Indigenous people, people who come from overseas, that come here that want visas and work here and study here. So when we ran the first course in the first year, and I think on the previous slide, I talked about the technology, I actually ran a survey. I thought, I've got to do some publications. Everyone knows about those. When you've got your performance review, you've got to still tick the boxes of your KPIs of, what's your research output. You can be developing courses, but when you go for promotion, you have to also have those research output as well. Because my cultural loading over the previous 5 years was all about developing the Indigenous business in our business school, my research was, so I ran a survey and I thought, I'd like to see how students are engaging with the course, what they felt about their self-efficacy, how did they improve, their confidence in learning about Indigenous in business and where they were going to learn and be great employees. It was also a way of looking at how do I assess them and how do I report that? So I thought, well, learning and teaching people know this, that if you've got a new technology thing you want to promote to your conveners and get them to adopt it, PebblePad had just come out. So I thought about, let's do reflective journals. Let's put them in a portfolio and use the PebblePad. So I did a dual survey and we published on that. So it was a great way to incorporate getting a couple of journals, but also seeing, how the students were connecting with this course. The thing is that it was almost 90% of the students were international students. If they weren't international, there was other of our, cohort were traveling around. I had one that was in Thailand. He was studying while he was over there working, but he was a Griffith student. I had people that were here from Switzerland and Finland, a couple from USA. It was a broad international thing. So you could see that the demand for having like a standalone course was in great demand. The interesting thing was I had a lot of medical students in there as well. So they were having a course in their health area about health and practices in there, but they didn't have that other part looking at, and I think I've got a list of the topics that we had. We had to know history, communication, why culture is important in business in terms of knowing, where you might be positioned and meeting and knowing about traditional owners, all those sort of things, governance, leadership, workplace policies like racism, discrimination, all those things that are all business factors. So that's where, we sort of had this course, and it seemed to be meeting that demand of what it was an elective. It was online. It was over a 6-week, intensive mode, and it just was kicking goals. I think in the second or third year, we ended up with about 170 students that had enrolled, and it's still going today. So here we've got the learning outcomes. A lot of staff really struggle with converting, the normal, sort of Western ways of creating learning outcomes, because what I learnt later is you have a skeleton framework that you have to make sure that it all fits. You're going to have learning outcomes, and overall, obviously, a program learning outcome. So you need to know that if you're going to assess, that it's all going to be that you've got the right content, it's going to be adequately covered in class, that it's going to have, practiced within their workshops and their tutorials. And then we create an assessment that is going to be, you know, matching and connecting the dots, excuse the pun. So our, you know, this is the ones that we used in the Indigenous business course. So you can see that, you know, we wanted to make sure that they understood what, you know, ways of knowing, being and doing, but also this, you know, connecting to their own culture and seeing that they had the similarities and differences. You know, communication, really important, because there is cultural protocols and knowing how Indigenous people are different, but also that, you know, it's about, you know, how do you create partnership and businesses with people unless you can communicate. Workplace policies and protocols, obviously around HR. Community engagement, again, this is about not just going into community, doing a project or doing your job, getting what you want, and then off you go. This is about creating a sustainable, continuous relationship with the people that you are going to work with, engage in and partner with. And obviously governance and leadership. So the methodology, obviously community of practice. So we did lots of, you know, trying to keep everybody in the loop. So moving along, we started thinking about, after it had been run for a couple of years, my next champion being the, well then she was only head of department, but she's now the Dean of our business school engagement. So, you know, her championing me and showing me and navigating the ways of, this is probably interpreting a lot of the, excuse me, the crap that can go on, that, you know, you're trying to work out, how do I navigate all these things that I'm supposed to be doing? How do I get to the next level? If I want to get here and I want to create a new course or I want to do something else, how do I start it? How do I get the action happening? How do I get the impact from it? So together, she was in charge and she led the entire developing of a new foundation of complete business program. Names were all different, like going from Accounting 101 to Why Money Matters, you know, the purpose of business. You know, instead of just having the Asia and Asia Pacific, we put in Australia because we want to know first, where do you come from before you start trading? You know, so those are the type of courses that we were tabling to try and develop a series of 7 foundation courses. We did the, you know, the butcher paper workshopping around all the conveners who were writing up the curriculum. I would go to their tables and my theme that I was leading was First Nations people. So because I'd been around for a long time at that stage, I taught in economics, I'd been in, you know, obviously some of the management courses, every stats class that I could do through my degree, I did. So I knew about research and all those sort of things that they were talking about there. Obviously all the accounting courses. So I could go to the tables of all these different things. Obviously finance wasn't a strong point of mine, but, you know, I still knew that when I did the financial literacy project, I knew then when we look at talking about going for capital and loans and all those sort of things, how to get into the minds of the conveners and start getting a shift and empower them to believe they didn't have to be Indigenous to build it, but they could then look at, well, how can I engage, you know, the traditional owners, because there's obviously land councils, we've got community groups, we've got alumni that are Indigenous. So let's get a community of practice going on to show us how we could do this legitimately, authentically, and with the voice of our people who could help us build it. But at the same time, making our staff feel, you know, quite comfortable that let's just take baby steps and as we go along. So obviously my cultural loading was about mentoring, you know, being in the background, offering, you know, sort of a lot of the resources came from the Indigenous business course. So it had this, you know, domino effect of being able to say, well, here's the module on communication, or here's the module on, you know, management. Here's the one if you want to do anything on entrepreneurship. Here's something that if it's about why money matters. You know, how can you build things, and let's sit down. And I used to sit down with them with their course profile. And this is going back into looking at some of the pre-existing courses. I could see through my lens where they were trying to just put on the tail on the dog. Just, here it is. I've got a bit of Indigenous stuff on it. And I'd say, look, how about, you know, you do the introduction and then you've got a foundation of, well, this is what we're going to cover. because you always give the big picture in the beginning, don't we, when we introduce? And then we start saying, well, you can't, if we write, you can't introduce anything into your conclusion unless you've actually introduced it. So how do you add it into and weave it through? And my vision, again, I think conceptually with symbols and, you know, patterns and things like that. So I used to say to them, if you're going to have it like a brick wall, and this brick wall is 65,000 years old, it's going to crumble at some point. So what do we need to do to deconstruct that and rebuild it with the mortar that's with it, with all the Indigenous content and research and knowledges and all those things to build a really strong brick wall? That's our teaching framework of where we're going. So the assessments, again, an e-poster. This is actually one that a student did, but there is one on the reconciliation.org that gave the, you know, a comparative two-sided poster of how we looked at, you know, the decision making in a court process, how to you know, sort of our communities look at, you know, sort of organising that. So you can see that with the student, I get them to do, and I said to them, you can have handwritten stuff, you can do things that are, you know, symbols and posters and things like that, but it doesn't, you're not going to be marked on your artist creativity. Because again, over the years, I've had students that have been in computer science who've given me these really magnificent holographs of all these things to do. There was others that had pictures of the African sort of symbols of totems, but all symboled around what they interpreted around a particular topic. It could be communication, could have been about money, which I think this one was. And then, you know, how they interpreted it. What they were graded on was that they were told to do two-part legend. One was get the symbols out, like you do on a map. You know, you might have a church, you might have a train, you might have, you know, what they symbolise. You pull that symbol out, and what's your one word to describe, or two, what that symbol means in this poster. And then you do a 150 to 200 word written explanation of this two-sided poster. So it was saying that, okay, on one side we can see that this is the Aboriginal Indigenous way and Torres Strait Islander way that it's seen with the symbols. And then you see on the bottom that that is the Western one. The thing is, I said to students, make sure that you do on your second half of the poster your cultural imagery. So obviously this student was an Australian or USA or Western based, you know, culture. Whereas I've had others that were from China, they were from Africa, you know, they could have been Irish, because there's, again, you know, there was so many of a mix. So it empowered them to be able to visualize what it was that they wanted to tell me as to where their ideas of culture and business topics were coming into their first poster. Now, this was our first thing to make sure that students, it came in within the first 4 weeks. So we knew that they were engaged in the course because they sent it in. We knew that they were engaging in the course, and it was our first, well, we used to call it an Amber Alert, that if students weren't engaging, we could then contact them to say, hey, is everything going okay? Anything that we can do to, you know, facilitate a late submission, whatever. Then the reflective journals is that I used the Bloom's taxonomy. It was something that I didn't know how to embrace reflective journals. But again, it was referred to in the, I think it's called, there's a Working with Indigenous Australians series. And in there, they had a great, you know, sort of exemplar on how to use the Bloom's taxonomy for Indigenous content. So I just converted it to the business topics. So I developed a template. So it cut out, you know, all the you know, the confusion of how do I set it out. So in PebblePad, we're able just to put the little blank holes in and say, you know, on the top, this is your level 1. Just identify, you know, what you're interested in, you know, what's really, you know, would you like to learn more about, what was, you know, outstanding. And then you actually built the reflective journals and submitted it through PebblePad. How am I going for time?
13 minutes, probably about another 5, 10.
Sure, I'll be, yeah, real good. As you say, I can talk. Because I'm so passionate with, you know, getting out the connection of the story and making sure that I'm sort of also delivering, you know, really important messages for others to want to take up the banner and implement that wherever you are. And then the last piece of assessment was e-presentations. So because we've got an oral history, I felt that that was the other part to make sure that we had students who don't normally speak up in class, and those that I wanted to get the message across. I asked them a particular question. I'd say to them, so what? What's this course done for you, and how is it going to improve your position as a graduate when you leave? What's your employability skill that you can actually brag about now that you've done this course? So they were given 3 to 5 minutes. They could do props behind, they could do whatever. I've had them where we've had the message stick that was being sort of knocked, and it obviously attempts to sort of bring in a bit of authenticity. Others were very, very much in their own culture, but bringing across the message of what they've learned, because they can see the power, even though they're not of Australian or Indigenous descent, rather somebody, especially international, they could see that they could actually offer value and as a different person here in Australia. So that was the message that we got. So again, once we got to about 160 students, that's a lot of marking of, you know, of oral presentations, as well as all their reflective journals, because I got them to do a reflective journal, which ended up being about 400 words over the 3 little template areas, the blank things, to do the Bloom's taxonomy. And then marking, obviously, the poster was, you know, I could do that quite quick. But again, we know as academics, we are guided by a limit of how many minutes we can spend on a student marking for a whole entire trimester without going over, because we can't go into extra budget. But we want to make sure that we honour our students by giving them the best feedback that we could. And that was the, you know, the obviously drive in the assessments. Now, most of our assessments are guided by AACSB. Does everyone know about that, which is the international accreditation for business? And so we've gone through that process. And just recently, we were given a great accolade through passing our AACSB accreditation. And one of the comments that came out of that was, you know, the work that we had done in our space of embedding First Nations people in our business. So that was, you know, a real coup, I think, for our Griffith Business School. So when we get to our cherry on the top, everyone's got to have a graduate attribute. So I get a few giggles from the audience. So the thing was, and we went over this with our learning and teaching designers. We also had our course writers. We also had to go through with the Dean Learning and Teaching to make sure that what we did was, it was 2-dimensional, because we have undergrads, which is different to postgrads. So we had to make sure that, you know, we incorporated one that was going to be, you know, capturing, you know, more or less the journey of understanding and being able to, you know, be open and learning as where you're going to graduate, how your understanding of Indigenous First Australians fit within the organisation that you're going to be working in, working with other Indigenous people, as well as going through and looking at making sure that everything that we did was going to be with a first-hand experience of authentic traditional learning. And that included the assessment. We also had to make sure that any time that they're going to be, and we hope all our graduates are going to be the leaders of tomorrow, that part of their journey is what made them that great leader that had the biggest impact. And that's because they've learned not only to stand in their own shoes and be, you know, quite proud of who they are and where their position is, but they've also learned that our 65,000 years of traditional history is also in their makeup. And that's me. Thank you.
Thanks, very much, Kerry. I know we've probably got some questions online, either being written or already there, but just opening it to the floor for now. Are there any questions that you would like to ask Kerry? I will be frantically running around with the microphone, so just raise your hands and I'll run to you. All right. The furthest away. Oh my God.
Thanks, Courtney. Thanks, Kerry. For those that don't know, I'm Scott, sort of program director of the accounting programs here. My question, and I think you touched on a little bit, but I know it's one that always comes up. When people want to develop in this area, the worry for someone like me, sort of being sort of white Anglo, how do I do it sort of properly, sort of not having the background and and not being tokenistic about it, I suppose?
Good question. The thing is that we at the business school have not, only had difficulty with the accounting. It's been across the board. I think the main thing is that a lot of people, when you've not seen how our original course curriculum has been designed and usually led by the CPA Australia, we've always had, and we don't have room to add courses in and content within it. It all has to be, structured. And so in getting into the minds of those that are going to be accounting graduates, is that you one day are going to have clients who may be Indigenous. You may work with people who are Indigenous within your organisation. So that's the idea that you start to build in. How do I do an assessment that could come into an accounting course that is going to develop the professional side of that? So, you might use case studies that would be about an Indigenous firm, because we've got some really good, one I think is about to become publicly listed, but we've got some huge, high earning revenue Indigenous owned businesses. So that's the sort of thing that you start looking about. And if you engage with the CPA Australia, for example, we've got an advisory group, Indigenous advisory group. We've also got Indigenous accountants that, and in your area, you probably can call on people to come in and do some guest lecturing. So those are the things that I would do. But again, I think it's just, you'd start off with, when we learn about accounting, the first things we do is there's usually sole traders, partnerships and companies. Well, what about the Indigenous business sector? Billions of dollars are sort of in that sphere. We need to look at that. Not only do we have a three-dimensional, business structure of three different types of companies, but within each of those, there's Indigenous-led businesses as sole traders, as in partnerships, and companies.
Just got a question here.
Thank you for sharing your incredible brave story this morning. There's a lot to take away. I got one question is, I am very impressed that you increase the intake of more of the Indigenous students, but how good their completion rate?
Good question. We've, I say we when I talk about Griffith, have put in so much in the last 5 years. We ended up with our first Deputy Vice Chancellor Indigenous, who took on the portfolio of diversity and inclusion as well. We ended up building, we've got an Indigenous education DVC. And so what we've done is spent a lot more time and developing on mapping and gauging how students are coming in. We went through a big lull because, again, the change in leadership was about, now we need to make sure that we were led by, sort of, again, a co-design of type of leadership, so that reconciliation is not just a word. It's about getting where our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and students don't feel like we've got to come up to the standards of the Western standard framework. It's really about where do we meet in the middle. And I think that's been our philosophy and our way of doing things, especially over the last 5 years. Now, I can say that, especially in the last 2 years since COVID, we're actually getting our retention rate is huge. Now, as the academic director, Indigenous in the business school, we connect to our Gamari Centre, and where we run an Indigenous working group. We also involve, each of the different units. We've got an Indigenous research unit. We have an engagement, outreach. And we come together as a business school and we say, you know, how can we, you know, connect us to the students? Because most of them, they will identify, but they won't attend anything because they you know, they don't want to be targeted. And we have to respect that. So we're setting up Indigenous Business Month. We're going to have a networking and a meet and greet. So we want the students to see what Indigenous staff we have on board, because over the last 2 years, we've now increased it from, well, one that identified, one that didn't, to now where we've got 7 in all. So, you know, we want to, partners, Indigenous businesses and students want to know that they've got role models. So hopefully that means better intake, uptake and retention rates.
I should probably not make it a two-part. Sorry, apologies for coming late. I got school drop-off on Thursdays. My name's Sheridan Gentile. So I think my question probably picks up on the 2 that already came through. One of them was just thinking around the student feedback and perceptions of the assessments and the approach, particularly thinking about the fact that our school leaver cohort are really coming through quite a different education system, perhaps to the one that I experienced when it comes to embedding of Indigenous ways of doing being belonging within the curriculum. But we also have the non-school leavers who will have a very different. So I was just interested in the feedback that you get from students in this space. And then the other question was more around staff and probably a bit broader, which is one of the things that I often have heard is that we can't do this in our discipline. It doesn't apply to us. And I've heard that indeed from business, but from many others. So just interested in that sort of staff perception as the conversation around what you're doing, I would imagine, particularly given the initiatives that Griffith will start to roll out more broadly.
I'll just give you 2 examples. One with the students is that we actually co-design with our students. So they come to the table. We have, you know, leaders that we have a student leadership group we call PASS, but we also have those that want to, you know, have a CV of portfolio achievements. And so we will get those students that will sit down at the table and they will evaluate what we're doing, how we're doing it, and what we may have missed. So once we roll it out, we actually take student evaluations, and I'm still, you know, lobbying to have a question put on our SETs and SECs that actually is a more qualitative version of the so what, you know, so, you know, what's your, you know, self-efficacy of improvement in cultural understanding once you've taken this course. So I think that that's a really good thing. From a staff perspective, I'll give you one story. I had, sitting down at the table, I had one lady that we hit it off really well, but very formidable in terms of had been running a particular course, and that was the Asia and Asia Pacific. And when I saw what she presented, I was bowled over. I felt really, you know, inadequate because it was just so dynamic in what she had prepared, but was very devoid, if anything, completely remiss of any Indigenous content. And asking her how she felt about that, she says, I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel like I'm confident enough, or, you know, I'm you know, got that authority to be able to talk on that. Fast forward, I got an email only 3 or 4 weeks ago. She's feeding me all the content, the emails that students are sending her. Not only that, plus a copy of their assessment. And she's saying, Kerry, I've just seen the light. So it's taken 3 years, but this you know, this staff member has been the whole journey about the pushbacks. I can't fit it in, don't feel adequate enough, you know, it won't work, to now where I'm forwarding them on to our Pro Vice Chancellor. And it's about, you know, having, I suppose, Indigenous staff within your cohort of staff that will take on that cultural load, but more importantly, that they're actually recognised in the workload for doing that job. Because a lot of the time we don't, you know, we do it because we feel like we've got a passion to do it, but at the detriment of our other, you know, KPIs that when we want to go for promotions, they are pretty low. But, you know, when we come to full circle, and I'm on the verge of retirement, so I want to hand this over as a, something that it's not going to take much for the business school to carry this on in the future. But I also want every university to make sure that our journey from not only from kindergarten, preschool, that we've got it in our secondary schools, we've got it in tertiary TAFEs, but more importantly, that our graduates go out and on their certificate, when they get their certificate, that they are, have got that accreditation, that they've been culturally, trained to know about Indigenous people. We actually offer the solutions to our today problems. We call them deadly challenges. How do we get climate change? Sustainability development goals of inequality, proper education. How do we have entrepreneurship that's innovative? All those things, we offer that. We've got the medicine, the, obviously flora, fauna ideas, the way we do tracking, bushfire management, all those things. So we hold the, the power, and I'm saying everybody, to embed it in your course, to see who you can get on board, co-design and co-write with somebody that is from the community, whether it be, academic or community itself. But yeah, work together, because that's reconciliation and self-determination in a nutshell.
I'm so sorry to do all this to everyone, but we're just going to have to wrap it up. So thank you once again, Kerry, for your amazing, and we've had a lot of inspiring statements said about the work that you've done. So
And I just want to thank Stuart too for the invitation, because it came out of the blue and it wouldn't have happened unless you had have reached out. Thank you.
We also have a class that needs to come in now, so I apologize that we're kind of kicking everyone out, but please feel free to take some food on the road.